play a little music while people are jumping on.
Light, I am light. I am 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 not the things my family did. I am not the voices in my head. I am not the pieces of the brokenness inside.
I love this song too. One of my absolute favorites. Yay, Janae. Thank you for coming.
I am light, I am light. I am light, I am
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this fabulous presentation for the 2019 Sacred Sex, Sacred Family Virtual Summit. I am your host, Margarita Macareno Manuelian, and I am super excited for this conversation. Sarah Poet is joining us today. And this woman, I just love the title. I want to make sure I read it correctly. She is a soul doula and a conscious embodiment coach for couples and individuals. Just letting that sink in for a moment. Wow. So Sarah, beautiful sister, you are such a bright light. I am so honored that you said yes to presenting at the summit, and welcome you. And I welcome those of you who are joining live, and those of you who are going to be watching the replay. And before we jump into the real meat of this, I would love for us to just take a brief moment to ground ourselves. So wherever you are, if you're able to close your eyes, go ahead and close your eyes, unless you're driving or something, or you're at work. But just take a moment to connect into your body, whatever sensations are present in your body right in this moment. Connecting to your breath. Just feeling the space that you are occupying on the earth right now. This very, very important space. And whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and open your eyes. So, welcome, Sarah. And just so happens that your company, your website is Embodied Breath. So very appropriate for this little grounding exercise that we just did. And to just get us started, I would love to ask you about how you got into this work. What drew you to the arena of spiritual development, sacred sexuality, as well as family? If you would like to share. Oh, you just have to unmute yourself.
That helps. That moment of pause was the perfect segue into talking about embodiment practices in the family, you know. So how did I get involved with this? I would say I followed my soul, even when it didn't make any sense at all. So I was a school principal. I I know I have 2 master's degrees in education, like in special education and school leadership. And the thing that called me forward in my own personal path and all of my inquiry, like half of these books in back of me on the shelf, I love investigating this like concept of masculinity and femininity, and sort of had forgotten myself as a woman in all of that striving around succeeding in the school arena and the career arena. And then about 7 years ago, like woke up to what I had lost. And my own journey was very much about embodiment, because I had a lot of trauma in my body. I had a lot of trauma memory in my body, a lot of trauma in my nervous system. And so the path to, any conscious awakening that I can claim or whatever was really a body walk. It was a body-based walk. And so that's why embodied breath, it's a very simple version of why embodied breath has the name that it has. It's like breath being the spirit and all that we cannot see, and the intersection of that and body. So it was a path of personal discovery, and embodied breath is all of the things that I loved most about my walk, and bringing that into this exploration of the archetypal masculine feminine, of love, of consciousness, of how we meet the trauma that lives in the body and the trauma patterns that interrupt our relating. Embodied breath is all of those things.
Indeed it is. Indeed it is. Wow. I have so many questions. But
that's what we're here for.
Yes. I also want to really get into your topic, because I feel like it's just so juicy, and I want to know more. So I'm just gonna say the title. It's Cultivating Sacred Embodiment Practices, Attuning to Sensation for the Whole Family.
Yeah.
That last part, for the whole family.
Yeah.
Oof. Powerful.
Yeah, so I'll talk about that, Marguerite, but I did not prepare a presentation. I prepared for a dialogue. So I'll talk for a while and then continue to ask questions based on anything I say, for sure.
Awesome.
So I was really intrigued by the concept of bridging sacred sexuality and sacred family. Yes. Like, thank you for doing this, right? Because oh my gosh, my worlds collided. Like my education, parenting world, and like all of those bags of tricks that I have, and like and then the work with couples and sexuality, worlds collided. So this is a really exciting bridge that's being built right here. So when I was thinking about how to start this conversation, I was like, well, what do I see a lot of the time? We have like very busy people living very busy lives. We have all of the things that happened to us in our past that inform how we show up in the present. I will say that I'm the mother of a 10-year-old son. There is not another adult parenting in this house, but I have a really great co-parenting relationship with his father. And he goes to school at the charter school where I used to be an administrator. Okay, so like a full circle, right? So all of the best intentions, like being a mindfulness teacher and a mindfulness teacher to children, just very recently, it's like, I forget to slow down with my child. So I live a life where I don't have like a full-time out of the home job right now. Like as a coach, I work from home. And so I prioritize my sacred practices. But my child, even though he goes to a progressive school and we live in a progressive town and he's like surrounded by progressive people, we still are interfacing with a very, very busy world. And so in doing that, our brains and physiologies are really fast paced a lot of the time. You know, it's like the default. That's what I'm saying. It's just the default of how we're interacting right now as a people, as a collective. And so given that we've had our pasts and our traumas, like when we stay in this default mode of quickness, of fast pace, like we are sort of defaulting to a state of fight or flight in the brain a lot of the time. So we're defaulting to a lack of presence, a lack of awareness. And when we're in that space of go, 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 and forgetting to be present, our relationship with what is sacred diminishes. And so I have a very particular interest in how do we carve out that time and space and practice for us to get those basics to cultivating that relationship with the sacred. So whether we're talking about parenting or whether we're talking about having sex with our partner, if we're not infusing the sacred like as a way of life, then we really are missing the boat. Like like intentional parenting that is by default like very, very fast is still inherently like it could be re-traumatizing. It could be like cultivating that anxious, out of touch, not connected to spirit, you know, that relationship within the child. Same with sex. Like you can go into sex and hope that it's sacred, or like have some breath practices, or, you know, like you're like, okay, I'll meet you there, and like we'll hope for the magic to happen, you know. But like in I mean, we're living modern lives, and like I was saying, they're busy. And so, you know, like how to cultivate those basic presence practices as a family. That's really what I'm talking about. Like how to infuse that as a family so that it's the basis for how you relate to your kids. It's the basis for how you relate to your lover and your partner. It's the basis for how you relate to the world. Like your relationship with the sacred embodied within you is the basis for any relating that happens.
Ooh, I love this. And I really, what you're saying is that the key is, correct me if I'm wrong, slowing down.
Right? It really is like inserting the pause. Like that's how I used to say it when I worked in schools. And I'm like, hey, mindfulness 101, we have to pause on purpose.
Yeah.
We have to pause on purpose. And like, you know, I get a lot of time to do that in my life because I've structured my life that way. But like I work with mamas who are like single mamas trying to date, raising 2 kids, like stressed out. And I'm like, 5 minutes twice a day. You know, like we insert the pause so that the brain gets out of the default mechanism. There's a whole bunch, I won't even go into it really, but there's a whole lot of information as far as like quantum science, quantum physics has been showing us, you know, like there's energy to the sacred. And if we're in the default mode of go, 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 we're defaulting to our old patterns, old habits, old traumas. And to bridge out of them requires the pause and the awareness into like, where are we going? You know, so it's interrupting the default that we've all kind of like just fell into until we don't.
You mentioned anxiety, which I think is such an issue for so many people. And how do you think anxiety relates to that?
Yeah. So let me just be really transparent that I suffered from really severe anxiety for many, many years.
Oh, wow.
Like many years. I mean, all of this comes very honestly to me. I won't even try to hide it. You know, why would I? But so where does anxiety come in? You know, in my experience, I was, oh my gosh, I was just trying to hold so much together and really kind of operating from more of like a perfectionist, like I should be able to have this together. I should, you know, like have the perfect life, the perfect husband, the perfect like job. It was like a self-criticism and a lack of connection to my own divinity, a lack of like being out of touch with that pause in the present moment. Yeah, what other questions do you have about anxiety? It's such a huge topic that I'm like, whew, it's really real. And I would say like, you know, I didn't have a therapist when I started to walk myself out of that anxiety. I was like, what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to start with noticing this moment. Like, I'm going to notice this moment exactly how it is. And then like, well, what are the stories I'm telling myself in this moment? What is like actually true in this moment? You know, and then the body, kind of bringing this back to those sensations and embodiment practices, like the body is a really amazing place to land when we're cultivating those practices.
Yeah.
So if I'm sort of in an anxious pattern and I kind of like close my eyes and attune to the body, attunement is a word for like checking in really closely and staying there. So in this moment, I'm like drinking Earl Grey. I'm in front of people talking. My heart's beating a little bit more fast. I could slow my breath down. And I'm like tracking the sensations in the body and really starting with the breath. Like the breath in the body is our anchor. Like as long as we're conscious of breath in body, it's happening. You know, like as long as we're alive, we've got the breath. So we start by tuning into it and developing that relationship to the breath and watching the patterns of the breath is like entry point.
Yeah. And my intuition is that a lot of the anxiety is happening in the mental field, right? It's like all up here, all these thoughts of like, you know, I gotta be the perfect mom, I gotta be the perfect woman,
right.
Whatever that means.
Right.
How do I make it all work? And then the embodiment practices, that pause helps us to interrupt that pattern, that
and make a choice
pattern. Yes. The sovereignty.
Yeah.
Being able to make that choice.
Right. But I want to also acknowledge how real it is that the brain has habitual patterns, right? So like if we have a trauma pattern or ingrained, it doesn't even have to be a conscious memory, but the body remembers the trauma, say of like, okay, like maybe my dad never, this is like, these are just obscure examples at this point. So maybe I'm a person where like my dad never hit me, but he yelled every day in the home. Okay. So there's not like a big what is kind of like a big T trauma. There's not a, I suffered something huge, but there was this chronic lack of safety in the home, you know? And so the brain, like every time there's a raised voice, or, you know, maybe the antecedent to dad yelling in your home growing up was the dishes weren't put away. I don't know, like there's a mess. Mm-hmm. And so maybe like those old patterns, you're like, there can never be a mess. And if anybody ever yells, I'm in trouble.
You're totally channeling my life.
maybe. And so those, like, the brain is doing that thing of like staying in that, like, I'm not going to be safe if X, Y, and Z are present. And so the brain is actually out of its optimal functioning, and it's more in fight or flight. It's like in this protective space. And so, yeah, the breath alone, like the physiology of paying attention to the breath alone can take us out of fight or flight and put us back into like our prefrontal thinking brain. And then that's where we make the choices. What was your question?
We're actually using more of the brain.
Yeah. Right. Whew.
Love it.
So, you know, so we're here to talk about like family and partnership. And this is all the basis of that, in my opinion, because to interrupt the default and to bring in this conscious awareness is the game changer. Like, it's the only way. I think it's the only way, in my opinion. This is the work I do in the world, right? So, so when I worked in schools, and I was really interested in like, well, how are children relating to their own self? And like, can they regulate in this way? Can they take themselves out of that hyper arousal or hypoarousal and into a state of regulation? And so I was like teaching the breath and teaching these practices. And what we know now, kind of like in the field of mindfulness, is that if we're also trauma informed, then we're bringing the awareness into the visceral body. So more and more trauma-informed mindfulness practices are like, okay, so like, what are your legs doing right now? Like, let's attune using our mental focus to our breath, to our thighs, to our belly, you know, and just cultivating that internal awareness. I want to put a caveat in here, like for anyone listening who's ready to jump into this, is that if there's severe trauma involved, that can actually be further traumatizing. So it's really important to have a professional in that space. But generally speaking, if the person's willing, cultivating a practice where a child can attune to their insides is really, really self-empowering. How many adults do we have that are engaging in practices, even sacred sex practices, who are not actually attuned to their own bodies? We got a lot of those. Yeah. So
why do you think that is?
Because I think like, generalized statement. I mean, I think we're usually like running from the tiger instead of looking at the thing that scares the shit out of us. And the tiger is just like this general metaphor for the trauma.
And
right?
Do you think we all have some form of trauma?
Yeah. I think, you know, the word trauma, people feel differently about it being used, but like, I don't want to underscore major trauma. I also want to draw attention to the fact that when the brain is in hyper or hypoarousal, it is behaving like a trauma brain.
Yeah.
And the more stimulation we have in a very busy society, the more we're defaulting to that brain activity. So then our reactivity goes up. You know, like we're seeing, like the volatility and the reactivity, like can really all be traced to like, are people willing to sit with themselves and look at themselves, you know, or when something happens, is it just this jump to like, well, it's someone else, what's someone else's stuff. So I think that, yeah, we've all got something that happens because we don't incarnate, in my opinion, like with a totally clean slate, most of us. So things happen and we take them on, and then what we do with them in the conscious arena, like makes or breaks our growth.
Mm. Yeah, like making the trauma conscious.
Right. Or I would say making the trauma pattern conscious, like the trauma pattern in the body. Because I had trauma that I did not have a conscious story for.
Yeah.
Which is where we start. Like if something's off and maybe we're scared of relating in a certain way, or we just notice this thing coming up in our lives, most of the time we want a conscious story for it. We want to know why. We want to know what happened to us. How did this come to be? And yet there's so much information now about how like this could have come from a myriad of places. You know, like it could be epigenetically in our cells. It could have happened pre-verbal. There may not be a conscious story. So we have a lot of psychotherapy, thank God for it. Like I love therapists. We have a lot of psychotherapy that wants to talk about the problems, but we have a lot of subconscious material that can't be worked out in that arena. But in noticing body patterns, we are able to, it's not like, we're not avoiding the story. We're not avoiding what needs to come to consciousness, but in tending to the body patterns, we're respecting the trauma or those patterns. I'll give you just one example that comes up. I was talking to a girlfriend yesterday about this. Like, say that there's like someone approaching you, like someone that you're interested in, or they might be interested in you and they're approaching you. How many times, now this is not like gender exclusive at all, but how many times are we like, ooh, there's like a feeling of fear or restraint in the body, or like something contracts in the body and we're like, ooh, maybe this doesn't actually feel good. But then we're like, oh, I'm going to ignore that. I'm going to like say yes to the date or to the sex, or, you know, like I'm going to just like override what the body just told me and go for it anyway. Usually we're going to get our asses handed to us in that kind of situation because like the body knew.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah.
Are there anything over here in the comments?
You a question. There's a couple.
Yeah.
So one, this is great. We're gonna go deep, right? Could you share some practical tools to take that pause with your kids? This is a question from
Great.
Nina.
Awesome. So depending on the age of the kids, yes, I have lots, and people are welcome to reach out to me clearly for individualized support. So if the kids are little kids, that's mostly like a pretend, liking it to animals or something like that, or like moving the body. Yesterday I was talking to a woman, we were talking about like supporting the central channel of her child, like getting the energy, like moving out of the body because he often gets really frustrated, right? And so they were going to take a pause and go outside to the backyard, and he was going to like pound the earth and then jump up and down, you know? And so you're attuning to what the child needs. It does not have to be a sit down and focus on your breath pause. depending on the age of the child and the temperament of the child, that ability will vary. So kindergartners, I might do like a minute of mindfulness. Fourth graders, like we'll start at a minute or two, and then we'll build up to like a fourth grader who's used to this can sit for like 4, 5, 6 minutes easily, but it takes some practice. You can go in through song, if you want to start to insert this pause in your family, like put on some song and say like, I would just like to sit and focus on breathing on the song. You can ask a child to track their breath in their body. Where do you notice your breath goes? What do you notice happens to your belly when you are inhaling? Just real simple. One of the most powerful practices the parents can do is modeling for their child. So, say like the volume raises and there's like an argument's beginning somewhere in the home. You can say, whew, like almost making that breath like audible, like you're really modeling and going, I'm noticing that when we raise our voice, I'm noticing that my fists clench and my shoulders clench and my breath kind of stops. And so what I think that means, or what I think I need, is to pause right here before I say anything else and take some deep breaths. Would you like to do this with me before we continue our conversation? And then it's like the escalation, you're inserting the de-escalation. But how many times, as parents, if the argument's starting and we're like, stop yelling, damn it. Like we're not regulating the situation. And so what we need and what they need is for someone to like bring it back down. Right. So you're like modeling the regulation for them and with them. This is where I started to say, like, my son goes off to school and I sit down to meditate. At the end of the day, like, it's my responsibility to be like, how am I helping him discharge everything that just happened at school and cultivate the mindfulness practices with himself? So our favorites right now, I have a mini trampoline in my living room that like he'll use to like discharge the energy, right? Like get the energy out. Like any kind of limb shaking or jumping is like super good for discharging the pent up energy. And then his favorite right now, there's some resistance to sitting and breathing with Mama, the mindfulness teacher, right?
Surprise.
Right. So, but he'll do the metta prayer with me. And so we do that every day before bed. We do conscious breathing before we eat. And, because like to sit down after a rushed day and eat that really quickly, like we're not doing the body any favors. And so it's a really sweet time. And, I talk about like, get the belly ready for food, like find the breath, like make sure that your body's like ready to receive it before you put it in there. And it's really like helpful. I mean, 5 deep breaths before the meal changes the whole course of the meal,
I gotta try that. I'm gonna try that. That sounds great. No, this is such useful, practical information. I love it.
Okay, good. Because clearly I could like yammer about it all day. Thank you everyone for watching.
I love that. Okay, our next question comes from Danae. This is a great question. My family and I were thinking of starting the first part of our day with each other at 5 a.m. with meditation, affirmations, and yoga. Would that count as mindfulness together?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. So here's what I want to say. This is kind of a little soapboxy, as if the whole thing wasn't already. I'm opinionated. So how beautiful, right? Like a family practice with meditation and affirmations and yoga at 5 a.m. Like, so I don't know if that means just you and your partner or your children are actually waking up. Yay, yay you, right? But Janae and everyone else, I really love the idea of making it a body-based awareness, right? So when we're doing meditation and affirmations, sometimes we can always kind of be going into those like upper realms, you know, like we want to just find the zen and stay there, right? And in my practice and in the coaching work that I do with individuals and couples, like we are acknowledging all all parts, like all of you is welcome here, you know? So like maybe you're having a really crappy morning one morning, like make sure that that's invited into the space authentically. And like that there's not a focus on always going up, 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 you know, this like, if only I'm spiritual enough, I'll have sacredness in my family and in my sex life and in my partnership. It's like, well, I think that we do that by integrating, you know, the highs with the lows, the physical with the spiritual and the sacred. So just, but with the yoga practice, I think that's really rich because you're bringing in a body-based practice. When new clients start with me, I have them start some sort of daily practice. Usually it's bright and early in the mornings. It was awesome. Like you're going to just infuse so much new energy into your family with this kind of practice. And you have to have a physical practice to go with your meditation practice, you know, just to be.
Yeah, so good to
that in. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
So Janae says, understood. Thanks. Acknowledgement is everything. And she had another question regarding sacred sex. Is there anything off limits, such as vibrators, you know, other toys? That's a great question. What do you think?
I mean, I think that I don't care to tell people how to do their sex life. So sacred sex for me, like like most of my healing, like is a very personal experience, more so than you know, like I am not trained in like tantra or anything like that. So I can give my personal opinion here based on all that we're talking about. I think that anything could be sacred. It's like the intention behind it. But when I hear vibrator or when I hear you know, other things that take us out of the moment, or when I hear vibrator, I think I assume that it may be something that would take you out of like the pure authenticity of the sacredness of the moment. And so I would invite such questions as like, well, what is the intention? And if the intention is like bypassing anything else, then it's just something to hold and explore. Maybe the vibrator is a bridge to other intimacy. You know, I think like the sacred component isn't the tool necessarily, but it's like the consciousness and why we're doing what we're doing and why we're engaging in the way that we're engaging. Does that make sense?
I think so. I think that when I first read that question, I was like, oh yeah, I mean, toys are great, and anything that gets you more, you know, just feeling more sexy is great.
That's true. Like pleasure is freaking awesome, right?
But then on second thought, I was like, you know, a better way to think about it might be Marie Kondo. Does it spark joy? Like, is it something where like when you're holding the vibrator, you feel like you're feeling excited, you're feeling like full of life? If so, yeah, go for it. But if not, you know, maybe some other toy or practice would be more beneficial. And I just want to mention that we do have a few other presenters who are tantrikas who have studied tantra. So just check out the schedule.
Yeah. Yeah, my intuition for me personally, and in regards to this question, is, well, just first stay on your path of exploration. Like we're all on an intentional path of exploration, and that is sacred. That in and of itself is sacred. Usually, if there's something that wants to like happen fast, like vibrators have this like fast feel for me. Like if there's something that wants to happen like quickly or intensely, or, that's where I'm like, there may be an invitation there to slow that down. And that's all. That's the hit that I get about that. Like what is actually wanted between two people? And then like, where can you be in the space of that exploration together without just like, getting it done, like in any way. Yeah.
Thank you. I love that.
Yeah. But our personal, like, I just want to say that again, like our personal paths, our personal relationship to the sacred is what's sacred. Yeah. Right? Like my soul has a history and a story and certain understandings of the sacred and certain understandings of like myself as a sacred sexual being. But that's my story. And I have paid attention to that, like through those pauses, through living an intentional life. Like I've cultivated those things because I wanted to know them about myself. And so that's what I would really, really hope for anyone, like not for me to say how to do it, but like, what is that inward path of the sacred? And asking your children, like, and honoring what is their path to the sacred. Maybe their path to the sacred involves a lot of outside time or a lot of drawing time, or, like how do they come to know themselves? This discovery, like this rich discovery of what makes each soul very uniquely sacred. And like, I want to discover that about my child every day. And I want to discover that about me. I want to discover that about my partner, and like this inquiry, this like really rich, like, ooh, I think we're touching the sacred here, Yeah.
Oh, it's so beautiful. Delicious.
Yeah, right. And that is, sorry, gosh, you have me talking about some of my favorite things. I could talk all day.
Thank you.
But like that flip side that we just kind of culminated with, like that's the opposite of being ruled by our trauma patterns, right? Like nearly every partnership, like nearly everyone on this earth is trying to operate right now through a defensiveness of their own shit, of their own patterns. But to acknowledge that in ourselves and be doing that good and sacred work of healing, and then coming to one another in that discovery mode. I'm living this right now, and I think it's like where we set free, like I'm not going to hold you to meeting my expectations of all of my projections, of all of my past history. I want to know the sacred in you. Like I want our sacred selves to interact here. Like that's conscious union to me.
Wow.
Yeah.
What came up for me when you were talking about that is this idea of laying down your arms, right? Like laying down, like instead of constantly being in that defensive mode,
yeah,
just expecting an attack to come from like wherever,
mm-hmm.
we're actually just opening our hearts to our partners, to our children, to ourselves.
Right, right, right.
Mm.
Yes. For me, that walk back to my heart, which like we're still walking, like I'm still walking that path. But the walk back to discovering that truth, like, I had to honor the trauma for a good long time. I had to heal the trauma. And then I had to understand that, like, oh, I'm still identifying with that. And as long as I identify with that trauma being who I am, I'm stuck in defense and I can't live in my heart. And that is like, shoot, I wish that for all sacred. I mean, that's like, that's sacred union. When we're talking about sacred sex and sacred family, like sacred union is really at the center of that. It's at the core of the family. And that's like the place where all of this is respected. But you're not hashing out that, you're not duking it out there anymore. Who's right? Who's to blame? Like, that's old story.
Old story. Yeah, and that's the healing path.
Yeah.
Releasing that old story. That's like, why are we defending that old story? What's the point? What's
Right.
the point of defending something that you don't even really believe in?
Because we've taken it on as a part of our identity. Like, we think that we're defending ourselves.
Yeah.
But it's not ourselves. Yeah. So coming back into an awareness of your sacred self, embracing sacred self. So rich.
Good. Oh my gosh, Sarah. I know we're getting toward the end of our time, but I just wanted to ask if anyone had questions. We're open to folks jumping on. You can just unmute yourself, and if you have a question or if you have a comment for us, anything that we can address, please feel free. And we'll just take some time to breathe. If anyone is called to jump in, please go for it. Or as well, you can also type in to the chat and I can read the question or comment.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining and listening. We'd love to hear what came up for you. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks for joining.
Jocelyn says, amazing share. Thank you.
Sure, for sure.
Jocelyn is going to be presenting on pleasure, good for the whole family. So that's going to be very juicy.
I want to see that.
Oh, and Michelle is going to be presenting, Michelle and Kayvon are going to be presenting on human design and how it relates to sexuality.
Nice.
So these are some conversations for us to look forward to. This is great. This is so rich. I feel like I could keep talking about this forever and ever.
Yeah.
Right?
Me too. Yes. So we will.
We definitely will. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who joined us, and Sarah, if you would like to share with us like ways we can get in touch with you, or
Beautiful. Yeah. So I'm Sarah Poet on Facebook. My business is Embodied Breath, yourembodiedbreath.com. And I'm really interested in working with couples to shift into conscious sacred union. You know, couples that came together under an old paradigm, you know, one or both are waking up and they're shifting into conscious union. That is exactly the work right now. So I work with couples for 12 weeks, and they go through the shift, and it's so amazing, beautiful. And I'm like, holy crap, this is so much better than being a school principal.
Awesome.
Yes.
And this is a question that, probably a lot of people are thinking about, like, what do you say to someone who wants to do this work and their partner is not as enthusiastic?
That's really common right now, right? Like I had 5 women last week approach me and their men would not come to the table. I am very adept at speaking to the feminine and speaking to the masculine, regardless of gender, regardless. I worked primarily with adolescent males my entire education career. So I'm like, I speak men, like bring them on in, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm not assuming either that it's always the man who's reluctant, but I think we have this like old paradigm association with therapy being like, I've heard many men say like, by the time we're there, it's the end. And so it's a really rich place where if you sense that there might be an end, if there is not an intervention, and you want to do more growth work than you do hashing out everything that has happened, because I don't do that. I'm not a therapist. We're consciously creating the path forward. I would like the opportunity to speak to that partner to explain that difference. And then usually when we're in that consultation, the difference is clear and there's a relaxing, so this is all very like trauma informed and very safe. But I think it's a little bit cutting edge, when we're talking about like bridging into conscious union and balancing masculine, feminine. Like I guarantee the partner that's scared to come to the table wants what is at this table. You know what I mean? So, to directly answer your question, talking about the benefits, like what you want for the relationship. What do you both want? What do you both agree on? Like maybe you're not having much sex and it's a point of contention and you're like, well, I don't really want to talk my way through therapy to better sex, but like, how does that really happen? Well, it happens in formulating a true connection, which this work does. And so it's like, well, what do we both want? We want better sacred sex. So focusing on that, like, where can we agree and investing toward that agreement is more productive. I think it's the most productive way to come to this work. I think, in fact, it's the only way. It's the only way. We have to, like, stepping into conscious relationship and stepping into a conscious, like, commitment to living, I think is the most courageous thing we can do. And so for 2 people who are willing to make that commitment together, like that's the union that's going to last. I think.
And what's good for those 2 is going to be good for the kids, if there are kids in the future.
So much. I mean, so much. The kids are feeling all of the tension. They're feeling it. They're little feelers, right? So if it's existing in the home, it's trickling down whether we want it to be there or not. So it is an investment for the whole family. And when people start to see that, they do it. They do the work more readily when they acknowledge that. But laying down our personal defenses is like, shoo, it's hard sometimes. I get it.
It's so hard.
It's so hard. And so worthy. So, like for people to step into this arena, the kinds of conversations that we're having here, you know, for people to step into this arena, like, you have to be ready. And that's who I'm calling to, you know?
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you. This has been so, so wonderful. And thank you so much to everyone who's on live, and thank you to everyone who's going to be watching the replay. I just want to affirm again that every little step that you're taking toward healing yourself, to healing your personal relationship with sexuality, with family dynamics, this is not only benefiting you, this is benefiting everyone around you. So all the people that you interact, friends, family, strangers, it really impacts the whole world.
Thank you for saying that. I really, really believe that conscious union between two people is what changes the world. Because we're doing it at the heart level, which is affecting the family, which is affecting the community. We can't be doing it any other way anymore. I mean, that's why my work is focusing in the center of the human soul, but then how two souls interact, and the space between, and the quality of the relating. If you bring that to your sacred partnership, you can take it anywhere in the world. Anywhere in the world.
Beautiful.
Yes. Thank you so much for the opportunity to have this conversation.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yes.
So we have
blessings.
Thank you so much. We have 3 more juicy conversations just
great
today, and then 3 more days of all this goodness.
Oh, yum. Oh, that's so good. Thank you for bringing it forward.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.